You carry a gun?
Yeah, I carry a gun.
You know how to use it?
Yeah, I know how to use it.
Will you use it?
Yeah, I'll use it.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to classicmovierev.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is The Phenix City Story, 1955. This crime drama is classified as a film noir. However, a good case can be made that it is not. I'll go with a soft yes. This movie is based on a true story. IMDb.com rates this movie at 7.4, while RottenTomatoes.com has a 75% audience score. Surprisingly, New York Times film critic Bosley Carruthers liked the film, saying, quote, "In a style of dramatic documentation that is as sharp and sure as was that of On the Waterfront, or, for a more appropriate comparison, that of the memorable All of the King's Men. Scriptwriters Crane Wilbur and Dan Mainwaring and director Phil Carlson exposed the raw tissue of corruption and terrorism in an American city that is steeped in vice. They catch in slashing, searching glimpses the shrewd chicanery of evil men, the callous and baseness of their puppets, and the dread and silence of local citizens. And through a series of excellent performances, topped by that of John McIntire as the eventually martyred crusader, they show the sinew and the bone of those who strive for decent things." Unquote. Bruce Elder of AllMovies.com said, quote, "One of the most violent and realistic crime films of the 1950s. The Phenix City Story pulses with the bracing energy of actual life captured on the screen in the establishing shots and key scenes, and punctuates that background with explosively filmed action scenes." Unquote. I wouldn't go as far as those two, but it is a good movie, shot in a gritty style with a lot of action. I enjoy watching it, especially having seen much of this type of activity firsthand. Phenix City, Alabama, sometimes called the Sin City of the South, is located just across the river from Fort Benning, Georgia. So there was a large market for drinking, gambling, and prostitution offered by the Dixie Mafia that ran Phenix City. Of course, the Dixie Mafia controlled with bribery, intimidation, and murder. Following the murder of the Attorney General-elect of Alabama in June 1954, the town was placed under martial law, and I believe the Fort Benning commander placed it off limits to soldiers. The town was in its heyday in the 1940s and 50s. Being raised in Mississippi, we always say, "Thank God for Alabama." Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Edward Andrews played bad guy Rhett Tanner. That's a great southern name. Andrews was first covered in episode 134, The Harder They Fall, 1956. James Edwards played good guy Zeke Ward. Edwards was first covered in episode 113, The Setup, 1949. John McIntire played attorney Albert L. Patterson that felt that the fight was no longer worth the trouble. McIntire was born in 1907 in Washington. Growing up in Montana, McIntire could ride wild horses. He spent a couple of years at USC before going to sea. He began working on stage and in radio and was quite successful. In the 1940s, he began working in drama and westerns like Black Bart, 1948, Down to the Sea in Ships, 1949, The Asphalt Jungle, 1950, Saddle Tramp, 1950, Winchester 73, 1950, The World in His Arms, 1952, The Far Country, 1954, and The Tin Star, 1957. He was successful on the television with The Naked City, 1958 to 1959. He also took over for Two Stars That Died, replacing Ward Bond on Wagon Train, 1959 to 65, and Charles Bickford as the brother in The Virginian, 1967 to 1970. He had a prolific career with films as diverse as Psycho, 1960 to his last film Turner and Hooch, 1989. McIntire died in 1991. Richard Kiley played idealistic Army veteran John Patterson. He was born in 1922 in Chicago. Kiley was mostly a television and stage actor. He was a good singer and won 2 Tonys. He began in films in 1951 and had a wide variety of roles. He played a teacher in Blackboard Jungle 1955, film noirs Pick Up on South Street 1953 and The Phenix City Story 1955, The Little Prince 1974, Patch Adams 1998, and a voice role in Jurassic Park 1993. Kiley died in 1999. Katharine Grant played Ellie Rhodes, the girl with a heart of gold working for the bad guys. This beauty was born in 1933 in Texas. Of course, she ended up on stage at the age of 3, graduating as a nurse from the University of Texas, and got into movies through beauty pageants. Her movies include The Phenix City Story 1955, Mr. Corey 1957, The Brothers Rico 1957, Operation Madball 1957, The Night the World Ended 1957, The Guns of Fort Petticoat 1957, which is an Audie Murphy movie you should see if you haven't, Anatomy of a Murder 1959, The Big Circus 1959, and The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad 1958. She married Bing Crosby in 1957 and virtually left film. She is still alive. Jean Carson played Mob Mall Cassie. In this role, she was definitely playing against type. Carson was born in 1923 in West Virginia. As a child, she was trained in dance and music and began performing by the age of 12. Carson attended Carnegie Mellon University before heading to Broadway, where she was active from the late 40s through the early 1950s. During much of the 1950s and 1960s, she played spots on television shows, and she was most often playing a funny role. She had a very raspy voice that made her sound like a 2-pack-a-dayer. I remember a couple of times she was on the Andy Griffith Show. One, she and another lady were Barney and Andy's floozy dates. In another episode, she was part of a trio of man-hungry escaped convicts that captured Barney. She had a problem with booze and it hurt her career. She eventually cleaned up. Her last film was Fun with Dick and Jane, 1977. She stayed active in theater. Carson died in 2005. John Larch played criminal henchman Clem Wilson. Larch was born in Massachusetts in 1914. He was a World War II veteran that suffered long-term effects from PTSD. Larch spent some time as a professional baseball player, and he looks it. He didn't begin acting until he was 38 years old. He began working in television and radio in 1953. He did a lot of work on television. He has a lot of crime and western on his list, but his best-known films are The Phenix City Story 1955, Dirty Harry 1971, Play Misty for Me 1971, The Amityville Horror 1979, and Airplane 2, the sequel 1982. Larch died in 2005. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The movie begins with reporter Cleet Roberts as himself reporting on the crime syndicate in Phenix City, Alabama. When the movie was released in 1955, the murder trials were ongoing in the state capital of Birmingham. Cleet Roberts begins interviewing actual town residents. Ed Strickland, one of the newspaper reporters that reported on the town, was interviewed. He said the story cannot be overstated and there is still danger. Hugh Bentley, whose home was dynamited for standing up to the syndicate, was interviewed. Hugh Britton said that there had only been one honest election in the last 43 years. He talks about rat hunting. You can't find that outside of the South.
When I was a boy, that we, just for pastime, at night used to take flashlights and broomsticks and go down to the city dump to hunt rats, kill some big ones. And that a rat, if you turn a light, a bright light in a rat's face, that he'll run for cover. And it doesn't make any difference whether that rat is in the city dump or in the city hall.
Quinny Kelly was a courtroom janitor and witness of the murder that faced death threats.
You are a witness, I know, in the current murder trials now underway in Birmingham, Alabama. And I have heard that you have been threatened. Is that true?
Yeah, I've been threatened many, many times.
Is there any guard on you? Anybody trying to help you stay alive until you get to the trial?
No, sir, they're not.
You carry a gun?
Yeah, I carry a gun.
You know how to use it?
Yeah, I know how to use it.
Will you use it?
Yeah, I'll use it.
He then goes to talk to Ma Beachy, the widow of the murdered Albert Patterson. Her son John has been elected Attorney General and is trying the case. After the true expose, the real movie begins with newspaper and magazine articles from the time. The peaceful town of Columbus, Georgia is shown and compared to Phenix City, Alabama. Phenix City is shown as having a vice district located around 14th Street, complete with skilled craftspeople that can shave dice, rig slot machines, bootleg whiskey, and mark cards.
Some worked in factories like this one, making the industry's tools, dice, shaved by skilled hands, or loaded with mercury. Slot machines rigged to pay off 1 cent on the dollar, if at all. Whiskey that looked like bonded stuff, but wasn't. Cards marked with tiny pinpricks or trim so the dealers could recognize the aces and face cards. Tools of an industry that flourished for half a century because the good men looked the other way. An industry run by men I went to school with. Their fathers ran it, and their fathers' fathers before them.
It has been going on for generations. When first released, the 13-minute introduction was not included. The movie begins with Judy, Meg Miles, who is uncredited, belting out Phenix City blues in a club filled with soldiers. The lyrics state, fancy women, slot machines, and booze. With no money in the sock and 30 days in the Dixie dock, you'll wind up with the Phenix City blues. If you want to conjure up an idea of what Miles looked like in this scene, she was wearing a black, necklace evening gown with elbow-length black gloves, and her personal quote was, "How many actresses with a 40-inch bust have ever won an Oscar?" In the back room is the gambling. Everything in the back is under the watchful eye of lady gangster Cassie, Jean Carson. The beautiful young card dealer, Ellie Rhodes, Catherine Grant, is not working because she is visited by her sweetie, Fred Gage, Biff McGuire, the son of Ed Gage, Truman Smith. Cassie points Gage out to Clem Wilson, John Larch. Fred is in law school and Ellie only works with the gangsters for the money. Other than that, she's goodness and light. Fred plans on working for lawyer Albert L. Patterson, John McIntire. Fred tries to talk Ellie into leaving her job, and they have a little spat. A customer screams that the cards are marked. The dealer signals Clem. Clem and another fellow beat the man and throw him out in the gutter. A GI comes up to Ellie's table and starts gambling. Fred leaves, but Ellie says she wants him to keep coming back. Outside of the club, African-American janitor Zeke Ward, James Edwards, is smoking. He tells Fred that he should stay away because he is Ed Gage's son. He talks about Rhett Tanner, Edward Andrews, not being happy that he is around. The police come and arrest the beaten man that was thrown in the gutter. With everything settled down in the club, Cassie goes to see the big boss, Rhett Tanner, whose giggling southern accent is something akin to Snagaputh.
You know, there ought to be a way to make a lot of money with these little turtles.
Huh?
Yeah, having a turtle race, you know. If I could just figure out a way to fix the winner. Well, you work on that, honey. I gotta go over and talk to Al Patterson.
Cassie recommends that they get rid of Ellie. Tanner says she won't be a problem. Tanner sashays through the club on the way to see attorney Albert L. Patterson. He sees Albert's wife on the street. He picks up his car and asks the man if he's heard from Jeb yet. The ace criminal Tanner and the clean-living attorney Albert have pleasantries and discuss Albert's son, John Patterson, Richard Kiley, is joining the firm after his army tour in Germany. John will be bringing his wife, Mary Jo Patterson, Linka Patterson, and their 2 children to live in the town. Tanner offers Albert work, but Albert refuses. The two begin sparring with each other over ethics. Tanner finally brings up the others that he thinks are causing trouble for the syndicate. Ed Gage, Hugh Bentley, Otto Hewlett, and Hugh Britton, George Mitchell. Albert says he is not taking sides.
Half the trouble with the people in the world today is that they just don't want to let things stay the way they are.
Meaning 14th Street and what it represents, huh?
Gambling? Well, it was good enough for my father, his father before him. Yours, too. Besides, a grand jury has said there is no gambling in Phenix City.
A dictionary definition, meaning a gambler is one who plays a game of chance. They're right. There's no gambling here. Nobody in Phenix City has a chance.
Tanner offers the salary of $25,000 a year. Tanner then says he is not afraid of anything. On the way out, Tanner warns Hugh Britton and threatens his son. John and family arrive and are welcomed back by the family. John has been prosecuting war criminals in Germany. It is news to John and the family that they are going to join the firm and that they will be living in Phenix City.
Well, we're back, Dad.
Yes, sir. Well, I hope you haven't forgotten how to practice law.
What do you think I've been doing over there in Germany?
Prosecuting people.
Well, war criminals who deserve prosecuting.
Well, this will be a little different. We're going to defend people.
On the way through the town, John and Mary Jo see that nothing has changed. Albert tells John that all the other cleanup groups have failed and a new one was meeting that night. Albert also mentions that Jeb Bassett, Alan Norse, is in the reform group too. Gage and Britton come by the house to see John and ask him to help get Albert involved in the reform group. Mary Jo sends John to get baby oil and he rides away with Gage and Britton. Gage and Britton go to their reform group meeting. 4 men, including Clem, are blocking the driveway. A cop is across the street. When the two finally park, the 4 men proceed to beat the ever-living crap out of the two. A third reform group member arrives and calls for the police. They beat him as the cop slowly walks towards them. John sees what's going on and jumps in, getting a beating as well. The cop threatens to arrest John as the 4 attackers quietly leave. John goes to see an old friend at the Poppy Club. John tells Fred, who is waiting outside, that his dad has been beaten. John's old school friend is Clem. He goes in the back and socks Clem. Fred comes in and joins in the fight. Clem and John are fighting it out, and Tanner lets it go on. When John wins the fight, Clem pulls a blackjack. Zeke uses his mop to trip Clem and save John and Fred. The 3 men escape just before the police get there. They drop Zeke off with a promise of a new job. John picks up his father Albert over the objections of Mary Jo, and they go to the reform meeting. At the meeting, John unveils his plan to have his father run for Alabama State Attorney General. He uses the quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." This quote ties in nicely with the prosecution of Nazi war criminals, as so many average citizens turned a blind eye. Damn Nazis. Albert refuses, saying it's too big of a job for a man of his age. John goes against his father and says he will fight even if his dad won't. Tanner goes to the Phenix City Athletic Club. He meets some naked fat men in the sauna room. Jeb Bassett comes in and he is the informant for Tanner's mob. Tanner and his cronies fear John Peterson working against them. Tanner orders the full test of John. In the African-American part of town, Zeke's daughter is skipping down the road. Clem identifies her and throws her in the car. The car is driven by the Patterson house in broad daylight, and they throw the black dead child into the yard where John and Mary Jo's children are playing. As the car speeds away, they hit a white paperboy. You could get in real trouble in Phenix City for that. Gage Sr. goes to help the paperboy, while Fred Gage follows the fleeing car. Mary Jo has hit her Phenix City limit. John finds a note on the dead girl saying this will happen to his kids as well. Tanner made his mistake because John was in the Army. He wasn't a Navy or a Marine guy. John calls the police and they're pretty racially insensitive.
I said get out here and get out here quick or I'll be down there with a gun now. I mean it.
Okay, I'll send somebody right over. Somebody just threw a dead kid on Patterson's lawn. Go out and have a look.
Mary Jo takes the kids and goes to her mother's house in Georgiana. Fred Gage tracks the getaway car to the garage behind the Poppy Club. Clem catches him and smacks him with the butt of a gun. Ellie comes to the Gage house looking for the missing Fred. The police are no help. Fred's found nearly beaten to death in a ditch outside of town. When they get to the hospital, they find out that Fred was DOA. John starts hammering his dad about getting involved. Finally, Albert agrees. They have a coroner's inquest. Albert questions the witnesses and destroys their stories.
It was you who found Fred Gage's body?
That's right, sir.
It's the coroner's opinion that Fred Gage died of a fracture of the skull caused by a fall from a speeding car. Do you agree with that opinion?
Yes, sir.
What was the nature of the ditch in which you found it?
Well, it was just a roadside ditch, like any other ditch.
Well, would you say it was a rough, rocky ditch in which a violent fall could cause a fracture of the skull?
I sure would, sir.
Here's a photograph of that ditch. You recognize it?
Oh, yeah. I guess I do.
You need glasses. It borders the Coulter sawmill property, and as you can see, it's filled with sawdust, not a rock within a mile. Soft as any bed in town, softer than most. Gentlemen, Fred Gage's skull was fractured before he was flung into that ditch.
Clem is called to the stand, and the blood in his car is pinned to him. The jury rules that the death was an accident. Tanner can't resist poking Albert and John. He offers to pay off and even hints at hurting Ellie. Finally, Albert says he is running for Attorney General. Mary Jo goes back with John to fight. The campaign has bricks thrown through the windows, car fires, beatings, assault, attacking churches, and newspaper boys. Bentley's house is dynamited. You know, regular southern Mississippi election stuff. Albert crosses the state and his office is burned. Ellie stays at the Poppy Club to provide information to John and Albert. John holds a rally across the street from the Poppy Club. Tanner, Clem, et al. Show up. The crowd boos them away. On Election Day, beatings, booze, and prostitutes were used to repress voting. The Naked Sauna Club meets again. Albert has won, but he is not sworn in yet. Ellie sends the warning to Albert that something is up. Albert leaves the house alone to go to the office. Cassie spots Ellie spying.
Ellie, there are customers at your table. What are you doing at that window? Sally Rhodes, I think she saw you with Jeff Bassett. She sure got out of here real fast.
Ellie escapes after seeing the murderers gathering outside of the Poppy Club. Ellie heads towards Albert's office just in time to see him shot down. Tanner puts out the word to find Ellie. A huge mob gathers outside of the Colonial House. They want to attack the mob, but John insists that they use the law. Ellie contacts John and lets him know that she is at Zeke's home. Jeb Bassett is with John, and he tells Tanner where Ellie is hiding. John runs to the house, but Tanner's people have already arrived. Clem and another man are holding Zeke and his wife Helen Martin, at gunpoint. When the two men attack John, Zeke and Helen jump in, helping to defeat the Tanner men. Tanner has Ellie in the basement. John rushes down, and Ellie has already been murdered. John finds Tanner outside and leaps on him. Zeke is stopped from murdering his child's killer by his wife Helen. Tanner and John fight in the creek. Tanner denies killing Albert. Zeke stops John from killing Tanner in the name of what is right.
You killed my dad! No! It was you! No! No! You're lying, son! You gave me orders! No! I killed Ellie! John! I didn't kill your dad! No, Mr. Patterson! Don't do it, Mr. Patterson! Please don't do it! If your father was here right now, he'd say the same thing! You can't take the law's vengeance into your own hands! He killed Ellie! That don't make it right to kill him! And I stood there looking at her. She was crying and all blood where he'd beat her. And I was going to do it anyway. But she said, no, Zeke. No. We've been fighting against things like this. All our life, we've been fighting against people taking the law into their own hands.
Zeke drags away the beaten Tanner, and the two men embrace. John goes back to the Colonial House and punches Jeb. John calls the governor, and the crowd shouts out for a clean town. In the morning, the town is placed under martial law. The clubs were locked and cleaned out. I guess they burned the evidence. Not a good plan.
The devices that cheated them were broken up and burned.
John is elected Attorney General. He brought about the prosecutions. World famous short summary: nobody ever went broke building a bar outside a military base. Notes: like most Alabama politicians of the time, they were all avowed segregationists. The Zeke part of the story was added and is not based on reality. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I really appreciate you spending the time listening. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at classicmovierev.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All that I ask is that you jump over to Apple Podcasts and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.